I'm more Marvel than DC.
I gotta admit, I've not been into superheroes much. I don't know, for some reason that comic age missed me. And I enjoy the occasional super blockbuster that they have become. But there's a whole universe. And I think at the comic level, I think a lot gets lost in the movies,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
believe. But like,
I think so.
I appreciate that there's a lot of depth, especially philosophically, in
Hmm.
many of these comics. They ask really big questions and really get young people to think about themselves, especially zooming out and thinking, well, if all possibilities exist, then who am I and why do I matter?
Yeah, I think the good thing about comic books is that they can address things in a different way than if you just, share an article
Yeah.
about existential questions, right? They can push the limits and be a little bit political but still playful about it. They can get you to look at something with a different lens, a different perspective. So I think that's really, really great. The danger, of course, of superhero movies and so on is this over identification with self-reliance and this, the escape from feeling helpless or powerless. And of course, as existential coaches, we are confronted with asking the question, what do you do when you feel powerless? Is that such a bad thing? What is maybe the potential in feeling powerless? So that's kind of the flip side of working with comic books.
Yeah, and also depending on the comic books, there's usually a very clear divide between good and evil.
Yeah.
And I always found that really difficult, and I really celebrated when some big movies came out where it just wasn't clear anymore. One I remember really vividly was what that movie about, was it Niki Lauda? And there was just there's these two race car drivers, and it could have been as a good guy and a bad guy, but they were just really different philosophically.
Mm-hmm.
And you couldn't really tell anymore who was the good and the bad guy.
Yeah.
And another one that I read, Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth, when I was
Mm.
like 16 or something. And I remember that was the first time there was a scene there where the evil prince like attempted to rape this girl. And I remember thinking, from his perspective, it was told all of a sudden, it switched to his perspective. And I'm like, oh my God, this makes sense.
Yeah.
And I remember closing the book and I'm like, just having this moment of like, what? But it's so wrong. But reading, like having been catapulted into this guy's mind,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that wasn't anything that he considered to be wrong in any way. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I get that. But I
Yeah.
also find myself like really disgusted by it. But at the
Yeah.
same time,
Yeah.
it makes sense. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. And that happens more and more nowadays in popular culture. I realize that it's
Yeah.
no longer so clear what's good and bad, right and
Which
wrong.
I think is good because take, for example, A Song of Ice and Fire. So the books behind Game of Thrones, right? Some people just watch the series, but I actually read the books. And there you can really see that the behavior makes sense from, from the different characters' viewpoint, why they behave the way they do. And you can see the values behind them. You can really see how a conflict doesn't just arise because there's good and evil, but because everyone has needs and that those needs are conflicting because of limited resources or because of fear or because we don't know how to meet our needs and all of these things, right? And I think it's really important that we have more stories. And I love coaching with stories as well. That we have more stories that show the complexity of human connection and of needs. And it's difficult if we have more and more movies or more and more shows that kind of depict this whole, oh, there's a good and a bad, and there's a, beautiful and ugly, and, even children's books and children's movies. And I think we can treat people and, even, when we're engaging with our children, we want them to be able to learn how to navigate nuances And we can't just say, oh, they're too small to do that. We're just going to give them good and bad. No, we can still find a way to meet them where they're at their age and their capacity, and help them develop that muscle of understanding nuance and understanding difficult questions and gaining more confidence that they have the capacity to reflect and ponder. And that doesn't mean that you have to come up with answers. It means you have the tools to reflect so that you don't feel overwhelmed by the question itself.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so much of coaching is helping people navigate relationships, whether that's relationships with people or relationships with different concepts or, different philosophies. But, when I seem to have done that quite naturally. I'm not sure if there was a conscious choice at some point, but ever since I can remember, I wanted to create a bit of fairness, when people were too stuck on their viewpoint. I love to play devil's advocate, even if I'm not too attached to it. You're too strong about your opinion and there's other opinions. I find myself bringing in the opinion that they're just absolutely demonizing right now. And I'm like, I can see that point, right? It's like that evil prince there. I can kind of see how maybe they don't think they're so evil, even though they do things that are disgusting. So I think when we look through a positive psychology lens at people and a humanistic lens, existentialism is a humanism, and essentially there is an unconditional positive regard that's difficult to wrap your head around unless you are so inclined to look at different perspectives. And maybe there's a good link to bring it back to physics because we have to study, like society kind of wants us to be this expert in this one thing. And I sometimes feel guilty as a parent of a toddler to like, oh, maybe I should just like get her really into DJing from an early on, or, maybe I should read more books. But I want her to have a diverse perspective. But as soon as I do that, by definition, she can no longer be the same kind of expert than the 2-year-old who has focused on one thing from early on all the time.
Yeah.
But then in order to navigate relationships, we need different perspectives. And that's, I think, something that I really appreciated about you, how you kind of read and studied very widely.
Yeah, I think that's, do I dive into the parenting thing or do I continue with physics? No, I'm going to dive into the parenting thing.
We can do both. We have time.
I really think that we get too concerned with, will our children succeed in life if we teach them math and and calculus and music and dance and sports early on. And I mean, we do know that through research that what kids need most is unconditional love, and that we believe in them and that we show them how to connect with themselves and with us, right? They need unconditional love and structure. So just to give them a structure where they can still breathe, but where they feel like, okay, I'm safe in the structure and I know what to expect, and everything else can come later, learning maths, learning sports and so on. Of course, that's important too. I don't want to say that it's not important, right? But just to really see how can I show up for my kid and be fully present and give them my full presence and give them unconditional love.
Yeah. And this is so interesting through an existential lens, right? Because when we think there's freedom in unconditional love, there's structure in conditional love, right? If I do this, I'll be loved. And that's clear to me. And that's why a lot of the high achievers that I'm coaching, they're achieving incredibly, but it's because those conditions have been laid. I'm getting loved if I achieve, if I'm surpassing things academically. And that helps them be very successful, professionally, but it's a source of great suffering. So there's freedom in unconditional love, but also they really do need structure. Otherwise they feel loved. That's why when freedom is so celebrated, that's what the existentialists encourage us to appreciate, that actually complete freedom is something that creates a lot of anxiety. Yeah. And getting the balance right can be really tricky.
Yeah. And just for our audience, because I think it's worth mentioning here for parents, I really like the book by Shauna Shapiro and Chris White. It's called Mindful Discipline. And it's a positive psychology book that incorporates the study of mindfulness and compassionate study, right, for parents. And I love that, again, it's nuanced and it is really evidence based. It doesn't give you a simple, oh, just do that and everything will be good. And the sharing from their own perspective, and they do share, we don't get it right either, and it's just a continuous practice. And I love that book.